Hello, and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's podcast is number 1466. The topic is training, and the title is Growth Pattern of Muscles. So pretty cool. What we're going to talk about today is I want to focus on the chest, the back, and the thighs, and talk about the way in which muscles tend to develop. There's actually like a pattern in the way that they grow. So, for example, I had a client who's really starting to try to pack on a ton of muscle mass, and he noticed that the inside edge of his chest isn't as developed as the outside edge of his chest. And that's actually normal. There's some things you can do to emphasize the inner part of the chest and the upper part of the chest, which are the areas that kind of develop the latest. We're going to talk about what those techniques are. But just in general, talking about the fact that muscles do develop kind of differently, not different. They have a specific pattern. So, for example, whenever I try to grow my chest, all of the chest fibers don't grow equally. The fibers that you use the most grow the most. Now, you can change your positioning, do more incline work, and other odds and ends and types of positions we'll cover to try to emphasize more of the inner and upper fibers. But in general, when you do chest movements, especially dumbbell movements, think of like dumbbell flies. Well, when you do a dumbbell fly, the outer portion of the chest is the most stressed when your hands are out to your sides and the movement's kind of at full extension, right? So when the dumbbells have been lowered out to your sides, that emphasizes mostly the outer chest fibers. Then as you contract the chest to bring the dumbbells closer together, actually the weight of the dumbbells becomes less and less against the chest due to gravity. Since gravity is pushing the dumbbells straight down, as the dumbbells become kind of more basically over top of your shoulder joint. So if you think of just the horizontal distance between the dumbbell and your shoulder joint, as you're doing a fly, that becomes smaller and smaller. That horizontal distance becomes smaller to the point where the dumbbell is almost directly over your shoulder joint at the top of the movement. Now, the dumbbell's still going to feel heavy, but in terms of the weight load stress placed within the chest, it's actually lessened. So dumbbell chest flies, for example, you have the greatest amount of chest stretch when the dumbbell's at its lowest point, which is when you're stretching mostly into the outer fibers. Then as you bring the flies up, that motion upward, and you contract the chest, the horizontal distance between the dumbbell and your shoulder becomes smaller. Therefore, it has less and less kind of pull on the chest fibers. So at the top is when your inside chest fibers would be able to have kind of like the most contraction, the most stress, but that's also when the movement's the latest. So this is kind of neat to know because we did a podcast before, podcast 1219. It was a Q&A podcast titled, Can You Change the Shape of Muscles? And the answer is yes, you absolutely can. You can 100% change the shape of a muscle in the sense of emphasizing a specific part of the muscle. So, for example, the chest, if you want to emphasize just your outer chest to create chest width, you absolutely can do that. So it's pretty neat to know that you can do those things. You can really change shape. So for females, a lot of females I work with, if they've lifted heavy before with improper technique, they would have grown their upper glutes, but they wouldn't have grown the lower part of the glute very well. So that's something we can actually work to correct. You can actually de-emphasize the upper part of the glute and build just the lower portion. Or if a woman doesn't have a butt yet and wants to make sure that she builds the bottom portion, you can do that. So there's very specific positions and exercise selections you can use to target muscles to change the shape of muscles. So I thought that would be kind of cool to talk about. So the first one I wanted to cover was chest because that was what this client really wanted to know about. The first part of the chest to develop is the bottom and outside portion of the chest. And this would be, generally, it's the part of the chest that gets emphasized most when we do normal activities and normal things in our regular life. And then also any movements against free weights, like barbells and dumbbells, you're going to mostly emphasize the outside portion. Now, the bottom portion is typically grown just because in most positions that we use, the bottom portion of the chest gets the most stretch. Now, you can counter that, but the last portions to grow are typically the upper chest and the inside of the upper chest. Now, how do we counter that? As I do, like with my clients in my own training, do a lot of incline movements. I don't use a lot of flat bench movements for myself or my clients. We do a lot now. Obviously, if they're powerlifters, we do some flat bench work, but if they're looking for aesthetic development, we do a lot of incline, 15-degree incline, 30-degree incline, 40-degree incline, 45-degree incline. So we do a lot of incline work because that helps to stretch the upper portion of the chest. And then we do a lot of machine and cable flies. Now, this depends on what equipment they have available. So I write my programs for each individual client. So if they have cables available, we use those. If they have machine chest flies available, we use those because they maintain constant tension through the whole range of motion. So cable flies and machine flies, you don't have that deloading of stress as you come towards the contraction. So that helps develop more of the inside part of the chest. So being at an incline helps develop more of the upper chest, and being using machines or cables to do flies helps develop more of the inside of the chest. Now, you can do a lot of other movements. So, for example, there's what's called a guillotine press, which is a chest press where you bring the bar like mostly towards your neck and collarbones, not towards your actual like sternum. And you can do that with dumbbells. You can do it with barbell or Smith machine. You can do it at flat or a slight incline, 15-degree incline. But a guillotine press is a really good way to hit the upper chest. A pinch press, where you do with dumbbells, and especially at a 15-degree incline. Oh, fantastic. You basically just smush dumbbells together like you're trying to press them together as you also press them upward. And that helps to activate more of the inner chest. And if you do it at a 15-degree incline, that helps hit the upper inner chest, which is an area that, is very hard to usually target. Then we also have what's called scoop flies, which is a really good way to kind of emphasize more of the upper chest fibers as well. So there's a lot of exercise variations that I use in clients programming, but then also just structure by using, inclined movements, using a lot of machine and cable flies. So I counter this in the client's programming that we know the most common development is going to start from the bottom and the outside of the chest. The lagging parts to develop are the upper and inside. So for my clients, I try my best to program as much as I can towards hitting that upper inside. But even if you only exclusively do upper chest and inside chest work, you're still going to develop the outer and bottom portion of the chest kind of first. You're just going to have more of a balance as you continue to develop over somebody who doesn't know these tricks. So it's really cool to know that because, for example, if you're training your chest and you notice the outside and the bottom portion of your chest are growing, you're like, oh man, I'm not getting anything on the inside. You're not doing anything wrong. You can definitely add more of these techniques and special things, but you're not doing anything wrong. It's pretty cool. It just means your chest is growing. As you continue to stress the chest, as you continue to try to emphasize inclined movement and kind of inside fiber stimulation exercise selections, you can continue to develop like the chest fully and more completely. But it is a good sign that you're getting something to grow. So if it's starting with the bottom and the outside of the chest, that's okay. Just keep going, and it'll continue to grow. Another muscle that kind of has an interesting pattern is more like a muscle group is your back muscles. So when somebody starts training their back, typically the upper trapezius, and if you don't know what a trap, like your traps are, or your trapezius is, you can pause the podcast and just do a quick like YouTube search or Google search. But the trapezius muscle is actually a lot bigger than what people think it is. But it goes along the spine, kind of around the height of your shoulder blades up into your neck. And it forms what looks like almost like a diamond shape. But it's pretty cool. So I'll definitely check that out. But the upper part of the traps tend to be the part of the traps that grows first and the most. However, there's also a lower portion of the traps, which is extremely helpful for posture and for just better overall aesthetic development. So you want to make sure you really target those lower traps. And then also the upper lats. They tend to grow second. So what you tend to see is people tend to have like bigger traps. They have wide they get a little bit of width to their back, but they don't get any depth. So the back tends to grow wide before it grows like depth wise. Now this is very important, for example, for females. They don't typically want width in their back. So they're going to want more of like a V taper where they get a little bit of width, like up by the armpits, but they don't want that rounded, full, thick lat that looks like kind of like a gorilla type look. That's more typically a masculine look. Now, again, I'm using gender stereotypes. So I've trained women for bodybuilding who wanted that, like nice development in lower lats. I've trained men who wanted to do modeling and they don't want lower lats. So I am aware that I'm probably being too gender specific, but the upper portion of the traps and the width to the lats tend to grow the most, and typically the lats up by the armpit. Now, what tends to grow the last is that lower portion of the trapezius, which is like your mid-back area right around and kind of between and over top the shoulder blades, and then the lower lats. The lower lats, those suckers are hard to get to, but you can get to them, but they tend to grow very slow and very late in the game. You almost have to maximize your upper lats before you can really get the lower lats to start growing. Now, how I kind of counter this growth pattern with clients is we do a lot of rows, an almost obscene amount of rows compared to pull-ups and pull-downs. So I have clients almost always, they do more rows than they do pull-ups and pull-downs. Because pull-up and pull-downs will grow your lats, but they don't grow your mid-back very well. Whereas lots of rows, when they're done correctly, they'll grow your lats, but they also grow your mid-back. So that way we get that mid-back to develop at the same kind of time. They're getting the same volume and stimulus as the lats do. So we really do a lot of rows. We do, cable-seated rows, dumbbell one-arm rows. Every once in a while I'll throw in some like barbell rows. I tend not to do too many barbell rows because they're limited by lower back and core stability. And then also it tends to thicken out midsections. So I tend to be very careful in the amount of, in the kind of like the positioning and brace loading that I use for certain exercise selections, depending on what the outcome of the physique look is for the client. Now, if a client's power lifter and they do a lot of conventional deadlifts, barbell bent over rows are freaking awesome. They're great for that. But if you're looking at aesthetics and you worry about a thick torso, like thick abdominal wall, then barbell bent over rows might not be your best choice. Like T-bar rows, probably not your best choice. I've worked with male bodybuilders. Well, actually, there's a fun category. I've worked with male powerlifters who had thick obliques and thick abdominal walls, but they're kind of done with their competitive career in powerlifting, and they want to get more to like a good aesthetic look. So we de-emphasize any core stability-based work. We try to never have their core have to work really hard in any stabilization. And that helps to decrease the size of the abdominal muscles. And that might take 3 to 6 months, because we also do a lot of vacuuming exercises to learn how breathing control and pulling the abdominal wall. But there's a lot of nuances to that, which I think is super fun to play with and to know. Then the other aspect is just when you're doing a row, to understand that your shoulders need to move. So when the dumbbell or the handle or the weight or whatever it is, when it's moving away from you, you should allow your shoulder blades to spread open. And then in order to initiate the contraction to pull the handle, the dumbbell, or the implement towards you, you actually want to squeeze your shoulder blades together first before you start pulling with your arms. Your shoulders should move before your elbow moves. So your shoulders should start contracting before you start contracting your bicep. That's a really good way to make sure that you're getting your mid-back maximally involved. That's why I have clients send me videos all the time. So I work with clients online all throughout the United States and in 5 other countries, actually 6 other countries right now. Just had somebody sign up over the weekend. So we do a lot of video reviews because there's no way in the world I'm going to see them because they're all over the world. We do a lot of video reviews, and those are the aspects I look for when I look at their videos, is what muscles are initiating the movements, and then I give them tips and technique, kind of ways to make that better. Some other kind of special movements we use is with cable rows, we actually do like horizontal shrugs first. So I'll have them either alternate like a shrug version, a shrug repetition, then a full range of motion with the arms involved, and they'll just alternate those back and forth, or they might just do 10 shrugs right into 10 rows. So we do a lot of those. And then inverted rows against rings, barbells, Smith machine, but inverted rows are really good for mid-back development. So if you have never done an inverted row, that would definitely be something to check out. You can do it like TRX as well. But those are really good choices and kind of good variations to help develop the back more balanced than what it would typically do. Okay, now the last thing I want to just cover real quick is the thighs. Now, when people tend to start kind of training their legs, their quadriceps, the front side of their thigh, will grow really well. What lags behind is the hamstrings, the back side of the thigh, and then the glutes. So how we counter that is doing a lot of glute isolation work. We do a lot of glute bridges, like hip thrust variations of machines, machine abductor where you're pushing like the knee pads outward. We do a lot of glute isolation work mixed into our programming. And I often will kind of blend that into other programming days. So if they have an upper body day, maybe they're going to bench press, I might have them start, on the floor. Maybe they're doing some thoracic movements, some planks and core work. And then we'll also throw in glute bridges. That helps them kind of develop the mindset of creating leg tension and pressure. So leg drive during the bench press. But it also gets that extra isolational work into the glutes to help for growth. Then we also use what's called pre-exhaust. Is before somebody does a compound movement, like a big lift, like squat variation or a deadlift variation or even leg press variation, I'll often have them do isolations. Sometimes we'll do a glute isolation through all the exercises I named before, or maybe a hamstring isolation, maybe a lying leg curl, seated leg curl. We do variations of isolational work before we do our big heavy lifts, and that can allow you to target a body part that you're wanting to catch up to the rest of those body parts that are involved in the main lift, but so you can kind of get them some extra stimulus. Some special movements we use is I do a lot with the clients at our gym, like Brutal Iron Gym. I use our machine lying leg curl, and our lying leg curl, you can do really high rep volume before you do conventional deadlifts. That really helps the hamstrings grow. We also do variations. Our lying leg curl has the ability to shorten the starting position or to shorten the end position. And you can do different type of explosive work or different type of isometrical contraction work to increase kind of muscle stimulus during hamstring curls. So that's really cool. Then we also do a lot of Bulgarian split squats. You just want to make sure you're doing them down to parallel. So we do typically with the front foot elevated. I'll have them either goblet hold a weight or hang hold a kettlebell or dumbbell. But we do a lot of Bulgarian split squats. And that movement is a really good movement if you're getting down to parallel. It forces the glutes and hamstrings to have to work to balance the quadricep involvement. So it's really cool. And you can go through every individual muscle and talk about how they develop in different ways. For example, like the bicep, people tend to grow the bottom part of their bicep before they grow the upper part of their bicep, but the upper part of the bicep is really impressive. So you want to make sure you really get that one involved. Triceps have their own way of pattern of growing. So you can go through the whole body. It's really cool and very exciting. So I just thought it was fun to maybe cover some of this. So to cover the chest, the back, and the thighs, because those are going to be the big ones that most people are going to run into issues with. And then just share the normal growth patterns. So if you see that, you're not doing anything wrong. But then the tips on how we counter that in our clients' programming. Cool. Well, hopefully that was helpful. If you have any questions about anything, just always reach out. I really enjoy the questions. It's fun to know that I'm making a podcast at least one person will like. So I really do thank everybody who participates and sends in questions, and I just really appreciate the support. Well, if you like our podcast, whether it's this one today or the podcast in general, please share it. If you share it on social media, that reaches the most people. But even if you just share it in a conversation with somebody, that helps. Please do share the podcast if you have the chance to do so. Really just want to see it continue to grow so that we continue to help more and more people. Thank you to the patrons of the podcast, people who financially support the podcast. We do have people who donate. They sign up for monthly donations, which I really appreciate. And then we do have people who just kind of randomly donate, which is really great as well. The podcast is well over $1,000 a year for all the hosting costs. And then I give an hour to it every day, and I want to keep it for free. So I really appreciate the donations to help cover towards that $1,000 cost. If you do want to donate, you can do it at our website. Our website is www.brutalirongym.com. We have an option for a one-time donation, monthly donation, yearly donation, even $5 a month. It does add up and it does go a long way, so thank you. If you like the information we share in our podcast, you can find more from us on our social media channels on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube under the name Brutal Iron Gym. If you have any questions, feedback, suggestions, anything you want to know, let us know at our email, brutalirongym@gmail.com. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.